Whatever you think yourself, Chairman.
Deputy Brady.
Okay, well, just firstly welcome the Minister in here this morning and the officials, and can I just take this opportunity just to commend the work of all the staff in the DSP. I know they work under very difficult circumstances and making difficult decisions every day of the week, so just to commend the work of all the staff there in the DSP. And just to concur with what Deputy O'Dea outlined, some of the areas there, certainly some of the things that I see as priority and Sinn Féin see as priority would indeed overlap. I think there may have been a veiled threat there about the length of the government here, so we won't go there. But the first area there that I want to touch on is the whole issue of poverty. And it's estimated now that there's over 750,000 people living in poverty, in a constant state of poverty across the state. And that's according to Social Justice Ireland. And what we see here and government policy, I've yet to see a comprehensive policy as to how the state is actually going to deal with poverty. And indeed, the department and the department had to revise their own figures, the target of how many people they're going to remove out of poverty, particularly children. There was a figure there of 70,000 they wanted to remove out of constant poverty by 2020, and that has been moved upward to 97,000. And the fact that the department has had to revise your own figures by 35% shows that there is no comprehensive policy there to deal with poverty. And the CSO figures, you know, we outlined the figures there from Social Justice Ireland. The CSO figures show that there's in the region of 230,000 children living in a constant state of poverty, and that's up 12,000 in a single year, despite the so-called economic recovery. And we see the measures that this government and the predecessors have done in terms of targeting lone parents, and again concur with what Deputy O'Dea said, you know, but the particular cut there to lone parents and the lone parent family payment, you know, removing children from 14 years down to 7 years has had a detrimental impact on lone parents. And we know from the evidence that's out there that lone parents are at the biggest risk of poverty. And I suppose some of the issues over the summer, there's certainly been some very high profile cases there of the impacts that measures brought in by the previous government in terms of access and education, and we've seen how those measures have played out. And that's all, yeah, the back to education allowance, access and that, and you know, I know there is a report that the department is to bring forward or is in the process of bringing forward, so maybe we can get an update on that. That's barriers for lone parents access and education, so maybe we might get an indication as to where exactly that is. Just in relation to poverty, and another area that, you know, I'm dealing with people on a daily basis who are, I suppose, experiencing fuel poverty. And it's estimated, and these figures are by St Vincent de Paul, 28% of our citizens are experiencing some type of fuel poverty. And we know the measures that have been introduced by previous governments in terms of cutting the fuel allowance, cutting it from 32 weeks down to 26 weeks, and the impact that has had. And you know, we all have the cases there, the real life stories of elderly people, in particular, having to sit in public buildings, libraries, to try avail of heat, sitting on trains. You know, I've spoken to many people who every week would get on the train down to Rosslare in Wexford a couple of times a week from Wicklow to get some heat, because they cannot afford to turn on the heat in their own home. So I know there was a minor adjustment in terms of the payment from €20 up to €22.50, which indeed is welcome. But if you have a look at the cuts that have been imposed over the course of a year, it was 120 €20 that was cut in terms of the loss of the week. So can I ask as to whether that is going to be addressed in the budget, because I think it's a key area that does need to be addressed. We know, unfortunately, winters are getting longer. Temperatures are dropping, and we have that experience over the last number of years. So can I ask that specific question as to whether that is going to be addressed? Another issue there, and I've raised this with the Minister on the floor of the House, just in terms of the back-to-school costs. Very much a topical issue at this time of year. And again, there's been numerous reports that have been brought out, the annual Barnardo's report, the Irish League of Credit Unions, and they've put the cost of going back to school between €900 for a primary school and up to €1,500 for a secondary school pupil. And we know that the cuts that have been implemented and the impact that those have had on people. And then a question on the floor in the House, and just to put this on the record, the Minister, as opposed to answering the questions that I put to him directly, he used what's, I suppose, regarded now as a long-established government tactic of hitting back and not answering the question. He started using some example of what's in place in the North, which again is totally incorrect what the Minister said. In the North, all textbooks are free. Public the transport is free for any pupils living more than 2 miles away from their schools. Of course, they have school meals, so certainly we're not comparing like with like, but the costs of sending children back to school here in this state are substantially higher, and the measures that have been introduced by previous governments have impacted dramatically on many families and have driven families into the arms of loan sharks. And I welcome the initiative taken by the League of Credit Unions in terms of their initiative there, making available loans to people who otherwise might find it difficult. But can I ask the Minister, what is he going to do to address that issue? Will he look at increasing the back-to-school clothing and footwear allowance? Because, as I said, costs are escalating now. We have many schools now moving to iPads and all of the associated costs with that, as well as school books, etc. So just can I get some specific answers on that? And the Minister mentioned the paternity benefit, and certainly my party welcomed that and supported it. It was something that was a long time coming, but an issue has arisen there, and it affects fathers. If in the unfortunate situation where the child dies, and I think the period is there after 24 weeks, the mother is entitled to the benefit, but the father isn't. He has to go back to work straight away. The mother is entitled to 2 weeks' payment, but the father is precluded. And I think there have been a couple of examples now over the recent past. And this is a serious anomaly that is forcing fathers who should, in my mind, by right, be entitled to this payment, but it's forcing them back to work, leaving the mother at home, who is entitled to the benefit for the 2 weeks, but the father is forced back into work. And at a time like that, when the mother needs as much support as possible by the father, he should be able to stay at home. But unfortunately, after 24 weeks, if in the unfortunate situation where the child passes away, it is stillborn at 24 weeks or whatever, the mother is entitled to the benefit, but the father isn't. He has to go back to work. He's not entitled to the leave. So it's a serious flaw within it that so I think needs to be addressed.
In the case of a stillbirth, paternity leave doesn't apply.
Right. Okay. Well,
I know if it does. That's what you're saying. We'll have to check that.
I think it does. It does for the mother after 24 weeks. It's only after 24 weeks it applies, but only to the mum, but not to the father. And that's where the flaw is. So I'm asking you maybe to have a look at that and try address it.
We'll take a look at that.
Okay. Just the other issue there is just around the job activation schemes, and I suppose looking at a report there from the ERSI where they look at the social impact of budgets between 2009 up to 2016, and in the document that was circulated there, it says that the greatest losses imposed by budgets between 2009 and 2016 were for single unemployed people. And again, we know the discriminatory measures that were brought in, attacking people under the age of 26, reducing their social welfare payments down to €100. I think it's discriminatory, and that needs to be addressed. Because speaking to many people out there who might be out there trying to live on their own or whatever, living on €100, it's discriminatory, it's not sustainable, and it needs to be addressed. And again, I'll ask the Minister directly, is that a measure he will address? I mean, there's been a number of cuts over the years to the under 26s, and it needs to be addressed with immediate effect. Just in relation to the broader job activation schemes, and there's been a lot of announcements by the Minister over the summer, a lot of flag flying on that. But one of the serious issues that arose during the summer was an audit that was carried out into the job bridge, which goes back to earlier in the year, where it identified serious issues within the job bridge scheme. Now, the Minister has already outlined it is his intention to bring forward a replacement to job bridge. Now, can I ask as to whether we're anywhere close to seeing the detail of what you see as a replacement? Because certainly, and my predecessor, Deputy Angus O'Snodig, he had been raising serious concerns within Job Bridge. I indeed had raised serious concerns with you as well, Minister, and you had said that you didn't know of any concerns. Certainly none had been brought to your attention, but all this time that audit had been carried out by the auditors and had been sitting there. I've asked you a direct question. I wrote to you and asked as to whether we could see that audit. I think it's essential that audit is seen by all members.
It's on our website.
It is on the website. Okay, well, I welcome that. You had said in your correspondence back that you would have a look at it and come back to me and let me know as to whether it would be published. I welcome that, and certainly it's critical that we have a look at what the auditor has identified in there before any scheme comes forward, because again, my party had put forward alternatives to Job Bridge, and hopefully whatever you do bring forward, it isn't what I see as an exploitation of people for a minuscule amount of money. There are real alternatives out there, and hopefully you will take on board all of those issues. But just a couple of other points there, Chair, if you just bear with me just for a couple of minutes further. Just in relation to the Job Hat and Torresnue and CTEC, and I know in previous, I suppose, questions to you on the floor and through PQs and that, you had said that you were going to have a look at these, at the whole initiative there, and certainly I think it's well overdue now at this stage. I had said there are serious issues out there with both Torresnue and CTEC, and indeed you asked me to come back if I have any personal issues or anyone that has been in touch with me, and certainly there have been many issues out there that have been raised with me, Minister, and some of them there, I mean, one man, he went out, he found a job on his own right, nothing to do with Torresnue or CTEC. He went out, he found the job himself. He was hounded by the private company CTEC to find out who the employer was, because we know there is a payment there for these operators if they find the employment. But they hounded that man until he handed over the details of his new employer. Now, I'm not sure as to whether they were trying to claim any reward, financial reward, for finding that man work or whatever, but as far as I was concerned, it had nothing whatsoever to do with CTEC. Another man who highly qualified. He was out of work. He was hounded by the body to go and find a job. This man was actually qualified as a journalist. He was told not to be waiting around for a dream job, that maybe he should look for, and this is a direct quote, maybe he should look for something that may be a bit beneath him, citing building sites and warehouses. That man, he was hounded. He was told, he was threatened that if he didn't go and take a job that was beneath him, that he would have all payments cut. So again, this review is long overdue. There's many other cases there that I could go through, but I won't. But can we have a commitment that will be reviewed? And I think that process needs to be initiated before the budget. And just the final point here, Kirk, and thanks for bearing with me. Just in relation to the discretionary clothing allowance, which had been cut, that was a payment there that was left to the discretion of CWOs, and the previous minister cut that a number of years ago and decided. I think there was a lot of public debate about it, and certainly I think in some situations it may have been used for purposes that may not have been originally intended. But that was a discretionary payment that particularly elderly people who might, I think it was €250 that an individual could avail of to go and buy clothes. And a lot of elderly people in particular would go out and maybe in January or February and buy themselves a heavy coat, and in some situations where you had maybe a bereavement in a family, that a family member might go out and buy a suit for the funeral or whatever. That payment is completely gone. It's completely done away with now. And I think that needs to be addressed. And I asked the Minister to have a look at the discretionary clothing allowance with a view of bringing it back in, maybe not in its previous format, but there needs to be some sort of allowance there for elderly people, for people. I know the bereavement grant was done away with. That's completely different. That also needs to be reinstated. But what I'm talking about is the clothing allowance.
Thank you. In terms of lone parents, yes, poverty rates are very high among lone parents. I do think we need to bear in mind, though, that I don't actually think the most effective way to bring down poverty rates among lone parents is tweaking the benefit system or providing an extra 3 or 4 or 5 euros a week. It is actually facilitating entry to the labour market and allowing people to work, because work is not always, but generally better in terms of your income than being on welfare. And the main barrier there are barriers to education, of course, but the main barrier there, of course, is childcare and the phenomenal cost of childcare in Ireland. And the most effective thing I think we could do for lone parents is in the space of childcare, which doesn't fall into my brief, but obviously I have to take an interest in it because it does impact very significantly on my brief and on my budget. And we had some progress in this year with the second year of ETCE, but there's a lot more that can be done. And I don't need to tell anyone here that if you compare childcare costs in Ireland compared to continental European countries, the difference is just phenomenal. I think Deputy Brady mentioned that according to Social Justice Ireland, there are 750,000 people in poverty. It's important, of course, how you define these things, and what Social Justice Ireland does is they say that there are 750,000 people below the poverty line. But when they use the term poverty line, they're including people who are at risk of poverty, not just people who are in poverty. And of course, by definition, if you're at risk of poverty, you're not in poverty, you're at risk of poverty. And one of the interesting things that happens is when poverty rates go down, the at risk of poverty rate goes up, because people move from the category of being in poverty to being at risk of poverty. So it's important that when we use these terms that we're clear as to what they mean. But the objective, obviously, in terms of poverty, and we have plenty of consistent poverty and deprivation in Ireland, and nobody's denying that, is to make sure that it goes down every year and keeps reducing every year. And both deprivation and consistent poverty are significantly higher than they were back in 2007, 2008. So we have to aim to get back there. If the economy is fully recovered, if GDP is back to where it was and all of that, well, surely poverty rates should be back to where they were at that point. And again, bearing in mind when people do use figures, the most recent figures we have are from the Survey of Income and Living Conditions from 2014. So when people say the poverty rate in Ireland is X, Y or Z, what they're saying is actually not correct. It's what it was in 2014. We'll have the figures for 2015 in October, November, and we don't have the figures for 2016 yet. So we actually don't know what the impact yet of the last 2 years of real economic growth and falling unemployment have had on poverty. We will know that sooner or later. The study done on lone parents and their access to education, that's being led by the Department of Education. It's been done by Maynooth University. It isn't complete yet, but I know an initial presentation has been made to officials, which I haven't seen yet. But I would hope that out of that study will come some ideas and suggestions that my department could do and the Department of Education could do as well to improve better access to education for lone parents. Just on the Back to Education allowance, I think it's important to say this because often there is confusion about that Back to Education allowance. What the Back to Education allowance is, it's essentially when somebody is on a weekly welfare payment and they go to college or they go back to school, and it allows them just to keep that weekly payment while they go back to college or back to school, because to get job seekers, obviously you have to be looking for a job full time. So all the Back to Education allowance ever is and ever was and probably ever will be is saying to somebody who's already dependent on welfare, already on a weekly welfare payment, that you can go back to education and keep getting your payment while you're in education. It was never there so that people could give up their job on Thursday and take up a course next week and get €188 from the state to do so. And that's not practical. We couldn't possibly afford to allow people to just give up their job and next week suddenly expect to get €188 a week for education. It wouldn't be affordable, and I'm not sure it'd be fair, quite frankly, either. Anyway, I could go back to that another time. On the fuel allowance, just to give you an idea of the figures, the fuel allowance, to increase it by €1 is €10 million. And to extend it by another week is €9 million. So of course all these things are options, but if you were to extend it by a week and increase it by €1, that would be €19 million, which is a lot of money. Similarly on back to school, I think it's always important to point out that the payment that we make in social protection is the back to school clothing and footwear allowance. There is a school books rental scheme and most schools are now doing it, and Rory Quinn really led on that. We put over 50 million now into school meals and school breakfasts already, and I hope to expand that. And school transport is heavily subsidised as well. So what the Department of Education does is the back to school clothing and footwear allowance. And if you look at the Bernardo's survey on what it costs to send a kid to school, when they look at clothing and footwear, and just the clothing and footwear element, they say for a primary school kid it's about $150, and for a secondary school kid it's $250, and what we pay is $100 and $200, so it's about 50 short of the actual cost of clothing and footwear. On the paternity leave, what I'm advised by officials, I will double check on this, is that a father is entitled to paternity leave where there's a stillbirth and the child has reached 24 weeks gestation. Now you have to obviously pick a cut-off point at a certain point, and that's the same for mothers. But I will double check that and make sure that we're not wrong about that, because I agree there shouldn't be an anomaly there. On the lower payments to young job seekers, Deputy Brady, Deputy Kenny and Senator Higgins raised this, and I know that they've said that the €100 for the young job seekers is discriminatory. Just to point out, that doesn't apply to lone parents. If you're on the one-parent family payment, you get the full amount, so that doesn't apply to lone parents. And I think as well, we need to bear in mind something. I know Senator Higgins kind of mentioned that we don't know the impact that this low payment may have on young people emigrating. And you're right, we don't. But I also know a lot of young people come to Ireland, come off the plane from Eastern Europe, from Poland, from other countries, probably don't have great English and probably don't have great qualifications. And within a week or two, they find a job. And, you know, even a minimum wage job or a job just above the minimum wage in Ireland pays €400 a week. So we do have to ask the question as to why any young person in Ireland, particularly in this economy when jobs aren't that hard to find, are in a situation whereby they can't find employment. And they may have personal or individual issues. and they very may well have that, but they also may not wish to take up employment. And I don't want to be the right winger at the table here, but somebody does need to say that.
Just as a point, the increase in the figures emigrating during the period of austerity, I do think point to strongly, it's not the same if we look to the levels of those who were emigrating in previous periods where we had, employment opportunity, where we were not in recession. They were not as high. So I think, I certainly don't think it's a kind of a moral failing in terms of younger people who are choosing to emigrate or who are not finding employment. There was a reality that it was extremely hard to find employment and to find consistent employment.
Yeah, I think that's true, but where are we now? We're now at a situation where we've returned to net migration, and there are young people coming into Ireland all the time whose first language is not English, whose qualifications may be limited, and within a few weeks they find employment and they're earning €400 a week or €300 a week. So, I think we need to bear all those things in mind. And I accept that people may have individual issues as why they can't take up employment, but we shouldn't be so naive to think that absolutely everyone does want to take up employment. There is a small group, and it may only be 1 or 2% of people in our society who would rather not work. And we need to be wise to that, quite frankly, and deal with that and be honest about it. One thing that I think was mentioned by a few speakers is that those who take up schemes in education, should they be treated differently and should they get some benefit or extra money for doing that? To a certain extent they do, but maybe not enough. And I think if I was to make a change, it's in that space. It's not giving more to the people who don't take employment, but it is recognising that those who take up schemes or education or training, that should be recognised for them.
Did you want one brief point?
Just one brief point there, just on the cuts to the under-26s, and there was a report that came out there recently which specifically identified the cuts to the under-26s and how it's impacted them in terms of their housing situation, and people in that age bracket are substantially higher, I suppose, when it comes to homelessness, and those figures, I forget what report it was, but it came out there quite recently. So just to pick up on the point there that there is no evidence, or we don't know the impact that this cut is having on people, there is a real impact out there, specifically in homelessness. The evidence is there, the facts are there, that these cuts are having a detrimental impact on people, and they're substantially higher in terms of homelessness, sleeping on the streets, because of the impact it is having on them. So I can get you the facts of that report, but the evidence is there that it is having a grave impact, and it is a discriminatory act.
I think you need to bear in mind that there are individuals who will have individual problems, and maybe they shouldn't be on job seekers at all. Maybe they have disability issues, maybe they have mental issues, maybe they need help with addiction. So you can't speak about everyone in a general way, but we do need to ask a serious question. In an economy like this, where there is a lot of employment available, where people can come into the country and get jobs within weeks, why is it that there are people who are willing to accept €100 a week and aren't taking up employment?
It's quite a generalisation.
I accept it's generalisation, but you can't. But generalisations can be generally true, and those are things we have to look at. And
generalisations are generally not true.
Anyway, look at
We know in terms of
you understand.
Young people are substantially higher, twice the average, the national average in terms of unemployment, and this cut is having a grave impact.
That's actually the case all over the world. That youth unemployment rates are double the average unemployment rate, and that's a function of the fact that so many young people are in education and the labour force is therefore smaller. It's not that young people are twice as likely to be unemployed. And again, it's important to understand statistics in these things. Just bearing in mind, and touching on that now, somebody mentioned JobPath, and JobPath refers people to CTEC and to Turas Nua, and what you essentially have there is something that's new. It's only around about a year. It's a placement service. It supports people to be placed in employment, people who are long-term unemployed. And there are 40 or 50,000 referrals so far. Of course, there are going to be issues. In anything that involves 40 or 50,000 referrals, there are going to be issues, and I do want to know about them, and I do take them seriously, and I do want them to be addressed. And certainly, if there are any abuses, they're going to be dealt with. But I'm just give the figures. Out of 51,000 referrals so far, there are 92 complaints. Just to give you an idea of the figures, and I'd say anything you refer 50,000 people to, there's going to be 92 complaints or more. But I meet a lot of people who've been referred to CTEC and to Turas Nua as well, and for a lot of people it works very well, and they're placed in a job, and they're delighted to be placed in a job. For some people, quite frankly, it's come as a bit of a shock, because for years and years and years they've been on a carousel of unemployment, schemes, bit of training, back to unemployment, and nobody's ever actually said to them, well, we have a job for you, will you go to it? And, you know, it's not surprising that there is a cohort of people for whom this change, where the government will actually find a job for you and place you in a job, is coming as a bit of shock to some people. And, you know, everyone can't have their dream job, quite frankly. And our view is...
I think it's important to put on the record that a job isn't offered to everyone. The onus is put on the vast majority of people to go out. In some cases, they're being told to go and get 10 to 15 interviews every week, they're being told. And if you're not coming back hitting those targets, that the threat is hanging over their head that it's going to be referred back to the DSP and your payments will be stopped. So it's incorrect to say that a job is offered to people. The onus is put back on a lot of people to go and find a job themselves.
Yeah, when you get job seekers allowance, the whole point of job seekers allowance is that it is conditional that you seek work and you take a job if you can. It's not a job of your choice. And for some people, fair enough, this is coming as a bit of a shock to them, that instead of just being offered a cycle of training and a cycle of schemes, you're now being said, we have a job for you. But I think it's something that's going to work, and there will be a review, of course, but it's early days yet to be doing reviews, and we need to see on the JobBridge audit. It's important to say that was an internal audit. It wasn't, it was done by ourselves. And the way the audit cycle works is that auditors raise queries, and I'm not sure if you've ever done an audit, but the way an audit works is the auditors raise queries, and then the person who is being audited responds to those queries. And what probably didn't come across in the media reports is the auditors were happy with the response to the queries. So the auditors did their audit, they raised concerns, there was a response from the department, and the auditors were happy with the response. And I don't think that came across perhaps in the media than the way it should be. Just in relation to the clothing allowance, it's still possible to get a clothing payment on the exceptional needs payment. But there was something in the past, I think it may have been under health, because I remember it as a GP, where somebody would come into your practice with a form to sign for clothing. And I'm pretty sure that was abolished, but there was never much evidence basis behind that. It was based on the idea that for some medical or healthcare reason you needed additional clothing, as opposed to a medical garment, which is a different thing again entirely. But people who do need clothing as an exceptional need can go to their community welfare officer and get payment for that purpose. On the bogus self-employed, I'll have to come back to you on that. I know we've spoken about it, Deputy Representative Humphreys, and I think there probably is lost revenue there for us to the Social Insurance Fund. And I think in addition to that, people are losing out on their protections. Construction seems to be one of the areas in particular where this is an issue. On the standard bank account, as far as I understand, this is more in finance than my side. It's now a regulation that banks have to provide from this month a standard bank account. So I'd expect to start seeing those products appear on the market very quickly. What we're doing from our department is working with An Post on their one, and I think having a standard bank account will be very important.
Okay. Very briefly before we conclude.
Very briefly, the Minister, he didn't really answer the question there on JobBridge. He touched on the audit. He didn't get into the detail, but I asked a specific question. I mean, the Minister has indicated that he is going to be doing away with JobBridge. There's going to be a replacement scheme there, and I'm sure there will be some sort of budgetary impact there. Now, I asked as to what is the time frame for that replacement scheme. Obviously, it needs to... we have to analyse it, but I think it's important that issues that have been raised by my party previously and also substantiated within the audit that was carried out, I mean, the whole issue of displacing real jobs. There was no one checking there to see that these companies, I think it was a self-declaration, there was no one actually checking these companies. A lot of serious issues identified in that audit going back over a considerable period of time, and it's important that those issues are all taken on board in whatever format you're bringing forward in terms of replacing JobBridge. So can we just get an idea, what is the time frame for your new proposals around JobBridge? If there is no budgetary impact, is it safe to say that the mere €52, whatever it is going to stay the same for people who sign up to JobBridge? So just get a little bit more information on all of that.
Before I go to you, Minister,
just very briefly, Minister, I forgot to focus, and this would partially solve Senator Higgins' problem on the averaging. I think we can put a proposal.
Sir, you, Deputy Brady first.
Yes, and Deputy Brady, so my apologies for not answering your question. It's a matter of weeks. We'll have proposals on a replacement scheme for JobBridge in the next couple of weeks, certainly. If not September, certainly October. The budgetary impact, I don't want to preempt the decisions that aren't made yet. The budgetary impact, again, of course, has to be worked out in the context of the budget, but we would be moving towards reducing the number, capping the number of work experience placements that would exist on a new scheme, and increasing the payment that the person receives. So obviously, capping the numbers would bring down the cost, but increasing the payment that the individual on it would receive increases the cost, and we just don't know where that's going to lie yet. One thing I would say, I accept that there were abuses in JobBridge. I do accept that, and I know it's got a lot of bad press, but I've been quite interested going around the country, going to inter-offices, talking to the staff who engage with employers, talking to the staff who engage with job seekers, and talking to even branch managers of social welfare offices. They by and large are actually big fans of JobBridge, and what they say JobBridge did and does that other schemes don't is, first of all, you can get into it very quickly. You only have to be unemployed for 3 months. Whereas other schemes, you have to be employed for much longer than that. And the second thing they say is the kind of experience that people get is, for want of a better term, real work experience with a private sector employer, as opposed to what's offered in Gateway or TUS or CE, which tends to be with a sponsor or an NGO or a public body. And they actually are big advocates of it. And while I am going to replace JobBridge, I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. And for some people who've never had work experience, who've never worked for a private sector employer in a normal, traditional job, for want of a better description, I wouldn't like to take away that, because none of the other schemes that exist actually offer that. And these are multinational companies, they're private sector companies, they're retailers, they're a lot of them are very good work experience placements, and the conversion rate in terms of the ones who actually go on to employment is very high. Much higher than actually from schemes that get very little criticism. So I think we need to bear that in mind. And we will do that.